All right, we're gonna try this. This is the first time I've actually have tried this live, YouTube live. Little intimidating, I have to tell you, but I really wanted to come on here because I want to be able to bring out the part 2 of the Susan Smith case. There's so much to unpack here that I really felt like I wanted to come on live. And it's a trial. I'm trying to see if this is something that people like. Instead of an edited version, this is a live version. This is going to be really, really interesting. So, my question is for the Susan Smith case, is it possible for a mother to discard her children and still feel genuine remorse? That's what she's claiming, right? If you know the case, you know what happened. You can go back and watch my first video that I did on this recently. And it is a heartbreaking scene where the mom, Susan Smith, allegedly drove her car into the water and her kids, her boys were in the car. And it was a tragic thing that happened way back in 1994, and Susan claimed that everything, she was innocent. She claimed that someone stole her babies, and she was asking the nation to pray for 9 days. And every tear that was shed back then was just really another layer of the victim mask. The victim mask, I talked a lot about that in my other video. I'm not going to get into it too much here, but I want to really bring out another psychological indicator here that I think is very fascinating. All my videos, it's not about villainizing anybody. It's about looking at the behaviors. It's about looking at the psychological indicators beneath the behaviors. And this case is like that. So it's not about villainizing, it's about analyzing the clinical breakdown. So I want to take you into this breakdown of the Susan Smith case. You know about it? Do you have some opinions about it? I've noticed that a lot of my videos, there's so many different opinions on it, and that's okay. I mean, I encourage that. I encourage people to have their opinions as long as they're respectful. And I think it's important to talk about these things. I want to talk about something really, really important and really, in my mind, I didn't bring this up in the last video because I didn't have enough. I can only keep my videos that are out about 30 minutes or so. It might go longer. But I want to talk today about the maternal filicide, why it happens from a clinical perspective. Why do mothers choose to harm their children? I have talked about other videos. I've got more videos coming out that talk about this. And can can someone really ever truly have genuine remorse in cases like the Susan Smith? You watch the videos. Maybe you watch my most recent video. If not, go back and look at it. Maybe you've seen it, the footage back in 1994. You might remember that. But now, years later, she has remorse and she pretended to have remorse back then. But I want to talk about that difference. I want to talk about the difference between uh, regret and remorse, because there's a difference, there's a clinical difference in why one of them might be missing entirely from this case. And I really think that most people look at Susan Smith as a monster. The title of this is why she became the most hated mom in America. And lots of people, again, have different opinions on this. I talked about it recently about the victim mass. Today, I'm going to be talking about the maternal filicide. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I break down clinical breakdowns of people who have criminal backgrounds. Maybe they have a high profile case. It's interesting to see the behind the scenes, things that you're not gonna see in other true crime videos. I wanted to look at this from a different lens, through a clinical lens, through a therapist lens of the behaviors of criminals. It's what this is about. If you're interested in that, if you would like to know more about that, I want to encourage you to subscribe. I'm really trying to grow my channel. Subscribe, like it, all that good stuff. So I want to talk about a very specific profile here. It's the maternal filicide. And it's the performance that she gave in front of a nation. And we're going to go a little bit deeper today. And I want to talk about the one of the most difficult things a human brain can process. It goes against the most basic biological instinct, and that's to protect one's own offspring, your child. Most people will they would do anything to protect their children, and yet some do the exact opposite. And I want to talk about there's five possible motives here when we're talking about maternal filicide. And it's about, as clinicians, we look at this as we break it down as five of them, five different motives. And some people might think, well, it was a mercy act. Was it a break from reality? She wasn't in her right mind. Okay. Yeah, we could probably say that. But by the end here, I want to talk about exactly where Susan fits in, why that classification changes everything, how we view her mask. She wants to get out, she wants to be released, she wants to be put on parole. That was denied. And I think the courts see that. And the remorse is so important to be really investigating here, to dig deeper in this. And it brings me to the question that I asked in my other video. Is it possible that she actually feels remorse now, years later? Or is she playing to the parole board? I don't know. It's a very complex, complicated question. In my practice, I have to distinguish between social remorse, that feeling bad because society hates you, and internal remorse. It's that actual psychological weight of the act. So there's two types of remorse. There's the social remorse because everyone else hates me, or the internal remorse where I would say most of us have that internal remorse, something that we did and we feel bad about it. We want to correct it. We apologize for it. But I want to go back to her recent statements from prison and analyze her baseline all the way back to 1994 to see her psychology even allows the true remorse of the victim ask. If you go back to my video, my other video, my first one on Susan Smith, and it talks about how she put on this victim mask and she was pretending to cry for the cameras. And really, for 9 days, we bought into it. America bought into it. And then they found out the truth, and the truth was devastating. And I want to talk about this roadmap for a moment. We're going to walk through the five types of filicide, compare Susan to other cases, maybe Casey and Anthony. I've got another video of Casey coming out, and look at that remorse loop. So the five of them are, in forensic psychology, we classify or categorize these as five distinct motives. So we're looking at the motives, why they did it. And the first one is called altruistic, the first remorse. It's the parent that truly believes that they're saving the child from a worse outcome. And so it's a mercy. The second one is acute psychotic episode where someone was a complete break from reality. The third one is just the unwanted child. The child is viewed as more of an obstacle to a new life or a new relationship. These children are going to prevent me from having a relationship, and so I'm going to do something about it. And then there's the accidental motive, or it's not really a motive, but it's an accident. Usually, the following pattern follows a pattern of abuse. They don't mean to do it, but they do something bad, and then something horrible happens as a result. And then the last one is for spousal revenge. It's to cause the ultimate pain to the partner. So those 5 motives of filicide. It's the in psychology, we use the rhythmic topology to understand the why behind these unthinkable acts. I want you to look at the intent versus the outcome. So the first one is altruistic. Perhaps the most tragic and clinical from a clinical standpoint is the parent has a distorted belief that they are actually saving the child from a fate worse than death. Usually, this is accompanied by an attempt to end one's own life by the parent. You may have heard of how a parent might do something horrible to a child and then do something horrible to themselves. They believe that they're taking the child with them somehow to a better place or protecting them from a perceived intermittent threat. For Susan Smith, she didn't really fit that category. She claimed that she intended to, by her actions, getting out of the car and watching it roll down away, but they don't really align with that altruistic profile. The next one is acutely psychotic episode. It occurs when there's a complete break from reality. The parent may be experiencing a command or hallucinations. They hear things audible. They believe that the voices are telling them to do something. In severe delusions, they can be doing something horrible to their child. This act is often disorganized and it lacks a clear secondary gain, like money or even a relationship. There's no attempt to cover up with a victim mask. It's usually because the parent isn't really grounded in reality in the first place. I don't think that's what's happening here with Susan's case. Susan's behavior was highly organized. She created a story, a carjacking, and a description of the suspect, even a whole storyline, and asked everybody to pray for them. This level of planning usually rules out any sign of psychosis. The third one, however, is the unwanted child, or in this case, children. This is where the child is viewed as a barrier or an obstacle to the parent's desires. Usually, it's for a new relationship, a career, or even a lifestyle. But they look at the children as an obstacle. You're in my way. And the most convenient way to get rid of the obstacle is to do the most horrific thing possible. This is often driven by what we call narcissistic traits. The parent views the child as an object. It's in their way. It's an extension of themselves that can be just discarded when they no longer serve a purpose. This is where I believe Susan fit in here. This is the category that most clinicians would point to Susan. She had a relationship with Tom and wanted that relationship. She envisioned that relationship that was better than what she was having, and her kids were in the way. Clinically, we see that the children being removed could secure that relationship in her mind. And so she invented it. She created this whole storyline to help her. The fourth one is an accident. It was an accident. This isn't usually a premeditated act of actually killing a child, but rather the final result of a long-term pattern of severe and physical neglect and abuse. They didn't intend for the child to pass away, but their actions actually caused it. We see this in Hospital visits, I've done other videos about this before as well. Social services are called in, the parent lacks impulse control, and the unthinkable happens. Well, I think there is definitely a deep instability in Susan's life. The act itself, driving to a boat ramp, driving the car into the water, was distinct and chosen event, not an accident resulting from a physical struggle. She intended for that. She planned for that. And then she planned afterward what she was going to say. She made a script. And then the fifth one was a spousal revenge. I don't think that fits Susan either. This is the rarest and perhaps the most chilling of these. The parent kills the child specifically to inflict maximum possible psychological pain on the other parent. Horrible. I don't think we're seeing this here. This usually happens in high conflict divorces. The child is used as a proxy to destroy the spouse. It's horrible. While I don't think Susan was in that fractured relationship with her husband, her primary drive seemed to be moving toward a new life rather than um, a revenge, or rather than trying to destroy her current relationship. It does seem to overlap some with some of the other motives, but I believe the biggest motive was they were obstacles. So why does this matter in the victim mask? Because if you're that type 3 of an unwanted child, the mask is a necessity. If you're the one that views a mother who views their child as an obstacle, it's almost like, I have to do this. I have to do this horrible thing in order to get a wonderful thing. And it is a twisted way of thinking, but that is what Susan was going for. She was thinking about that. You have to convince the world that you can transition from that new life, that you committed that crime, to a new life. And that is where that was happening. She thought that she could create a new life. If it was psychotic and she had a break, we would have seen that happen in real time. We would have seen that happen after the fact as well. So with Susan, the evidence points really, it points heavily to the type 3, the third one, where the unwanted child motive. They were obstacles. She was obsessed with a man who didn't really want children, and so she had to do the most horrible thing in order to get the man. Her baseline behavior really wasn't psychosis, it was one of calculated removal. So the concept of, one of you asked, some of this came up at the last video. Can she feel remorse? Well, only she can tell that. We can't know that for sure. But I want to make a distinction here that there's a difference between regret and remorse. And when you're caught, when you're serving time, you're going to talk about remorse because that's what plays into the human behavior, right? Remorse. People want to see that. But if it's still something that they're not able to truly, genuinely have, then it's probably regret. Someone, remorse is more of a, I'm devastated by the pain I've caused the victims. Regret is, I'm sad about the consequences that I went through. See the difference? One is losing her freedom from being hated, but the other is genuine remorse and showing sympathy, is showing that she did a horrible thing. And I don't think we're seeing that here. When you watch the 1994 press conferences, we see plenty of tears, right? You've seen that. If you go back to my other video, I have a little clip that shows that. You see that, but are they for the boys, or are they more for the victim mask that we discussed? And my speculation, it's not a diagnosis, it's a speculation that true remorse is rare because the children were viewed as objects in the way of her goal. And I think that's what's happening here. So she's crying, she's or at least she's trying, she's acting, but she's living in regret, not true remorse. So, in a forensic interview, somebody in a state of regret will use a lot of I, me statements. I can't believe my life is over. I'm so ashamed of what people think of me. I miss my freedom. When you look at Susan's letters from prison or her early interviews, we see a focus on her own suffering. That's the key indicator. Her own suffering. It's not true remorse, it's regret. How could I get out of this situation? Well, I had to put on the victim mask again. And this is one of the most horrifying things that anybody could do. A mother and their child. And if it was true remorse, on the other hand, it would be rooted in empathy. And we're not seeing that here. Empathy is a profound, soul-crushing weight of the pain caused to the victim. True empathy. But Susan, not in my view, not showing that, and obviously not to the parole board either. So, what do you think about this case? What do you think about do you know about it, and what do you think about it? Is Susan remorseful, or does she live with regret that she got caught? People found out about her lie. This is where the unwanted child motive becomes so chilling. Clinically, if a person is capable of viewing their children as obstacles to be removed, it does suggest a significant empathy gap. There's none there. If you don't have the empathy to value your own child's life while they're alive, it's clinically very rare to suddenly develop empathy required for true remorse later. If we go back to that 1994 interview, the press conference, you'll see her stumbling over her words. It looks like she's crying. It looks like she's really desperately wanting to find out what happened to her children. But those tears were part of that victim mask that I talked about. They were a tool used to garner sympathy and even protection. It's also possible that she was crying from fear. If it was true tears, it may not have been because the children were gone. She knew what happened. Could have been fear. Maintaining the massive lie. Think about that for a moment. Maintaining that massive lie for so long, it creates a heavy weight, and it creates a psychological stress that can buckle and break under pressure. Those tears could very well have been that release of the stress or even the fear of being caught rather than the grief of a mother. It's tragic. If the unwanted child profile is objectified, the child is objectified, you don't feel remorse for an object. You feel regret that the disposal of the object didn't go as planned and resulted in your own downfall. Wow. So when you see her today, when Susan Smith, when you think about this case, if you don't know a lot about it, go back and watch my other video about Susan Smith. You can see why she became America's most hated woman and mom. And I've done other videos as well of other moms doing horrible things to their kids. And again, it's not I'm not my goal is not to sensationalize it. My goal is not to villainize anybody, but to look at the behaviors and ask, why? Where is this coming from? And even how can we prevent this? How can we spot the red flags in other people before it's too late? That's my goal. I want to be able to create these videos and do these deep clinical breakdowns of people who commit crimes because I think it's important to understand the psychology, understand the mental health of the reasoning behind these things. And I really value your input as well. This is live, right? I value your input. And if you have other videos that you want me to do, let me know. If you think this is interesting, subscribe to the channel. I really am trying to grow my channel. And so if you see this case emerge, and there might be new developments that come from it, I want you to listen closely if new footage comes out of Susan. Listen carefully. And I want you to ask, is she talking about the boy's lost futures, or is she talking about how much she has changed, how much she has struggled, how much she has suffered in prison? Listen for that. Those are tells, clinical tells, psychological tells. And the mask tends to slip. It's a key distinction when somebody had the mask back in 1994 to all the way now wearing that same mask. How does this compare to someone like Casey Anthony? I'm going to be releasing a video on Casey Anthony soon. We saw that obstacle motive there, but the mask was a little bit different. Casey's mask was total denial and the partying mom, whereas Susan's was the grieving mother, one that hid the crime through avoidance. The other hid hid the crime through performance of grief. Boom. Performance of grief. Susan Smith. I think this is such a profound case that we can't gloss over. That's why I'm making a second part of Susan Smith. And I think it's so important to be able to distinguish motives, why people do certain things like maternal filicide, and what we can understand from that and what we can take away from that. It's the power of the psychology of the mask that's so difficult to understand, so difficult to spot. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm doing these videos. We can look at the news, the headlines, we can look at other true crime, sensational videos. I want to look at the motive. I want to look at the behavior. I want to look at and ask and try to answer the question why. I think that's powerful. And from the perspective for me as a licensed therapist, and I look at these cases like Susan Smith and Casey Anthony that I'm going to be releasing soon. These are individuals that have likely suffered in their own life, likely have had a lot of mental health issues in their own life, in their childhood. It affects the trauma affects people, and it turns them into somebody that they don't always realize. And I think that's what's happening here. So the active projection that Susan conveyed in back in 94 when this happened is to still the projection that she has today. And that's scary. And I do believe people see through the mask. And that is why she has become one of America's most hated moms. We can see through the mask. What did you think about this breakdown? What was the most interesting indicator for you, whether it was this video or my other video? And by the way, I'm going to link that video in this one when I'm done. Did you see different interesting indicators that maybe help describe the motive? We know why she did it from a upper level view, right? She did it because of a future partner that she saw. But there's a deeper level that I am more interested in. And I think it goes deeper than even I realize. And I think it's going to really manifests itself as the days go on. She's going to appeal again, and she's going to apply again for parole. And we need to understand this, and not just in her case, but in other cases. And I think it's so interesting that certain people really try to fake empathy. They can try to mirror what other people think empathy is, but really, true empathy shows remorse, not regret. And I think that's what's happening here with Susan. So there's a baseline fracture in her. Susan's fracture was so deep that she had to create the villain that took her kids, right? And she even had a sketch made and she made up the whole lie. She was doing it for the cameras. She was doing it because she liked the attention and she played right into it. And I think that is why she became America's most hated mom. So then there's the psychological question is the mask is something that a person can not really never truly take off. Does it eventually become their new identity? I think that's a great question. If a mask can't be taken off, does it become then that they have to keep doing that? They have to keep wearing the mask. I think that's what's happening here with Susan. She has to maintain it. If she wants to get out of prison, she has to maintain that same victim mask. But I don't think it's genuine. So, all of these videos that I've done, all the cases I've looked at, I find that the mask isn't just a choice, it becomes a person's way to survive their own reality. If Susan were to take off the victim mask and then look at herself in the mirror as she truly is, the psychological weight would likely be so heavy, too much for her ego to handle. So they start to believe their own performance, their own lie, their own storyline, their false narrative. They have to believe it to maintain that image. Otherwise, it's a total psychological collapse. They don't just wear a mask, they become it. That is frightening. So, as we wrap up this live this live, what do you call this? Live show, live video, live breakdown. There we go. As we wrap up today's session, I want to leave you with a clinical takeaway that goes way beyond the Susan Smith case. It's not just true crime, it's a profound study in what I call the shattered ego. Happens to a lot of people, doesn't have to be criminals. In a healthy psychological life, in a person, the biological drive to protect one's offspring is the strongest instinct that we have. A lot of you have children, you would die for them. You wouldn't do the opposite to them. You would do anything for them. It's the baseline of of humanity. But in Susan Smith, we see that what happens when that baseline is fractured so much for a specific life. They create a specific lie that they tell themselves to help them feel better when they commit the act. It's a life where she was loved, she wanted to be free, she wanted to be with a person, and the children were the obstacles in her way. When that desire of self serving reality outweighs the drive to protect, the ego can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth. That's true. It shatters. In out of those shards, the victim mask is born and put on. The mask isn't just a lie that she told us, it's the lie that she had to keep telling herself years later, over and over and over again. And she's still telling herself that. When you look at these two cases between Susan and Casey Anthony, you don't just look for the monster, you look for the mask. The performance of someone who is trying to survive the reality of their own choices. Wow. They have to. They have to keep that facade up. So this is the end here. I want to thank you for joining me on this bonus part two. And I really value your input. If you have other ideas, other cases you want me to look at, let me know. And this was my first live. It's always awkward the first time, right? And I'm really trying to experiment if the clinical breakdowns are good live or not, or maybe a different way, a different thing to do live. But I really try to put a lot of effort in my videos, and I think you'll like them. If you haven't seen them yet, go check out my Susan Smith one and see what and subscribe to the channel. That helps me grow. All right, my friends, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you for joining this live, my first live. Let me know what you think. Take care. Bye.